Just before the break, Ms. Nedden, you made reference to one of the SFAB working groups. I think you said sockeye pink and chum, but might have meant sockeye pink. Sorry, you said sockeye pink and Chinook, and may have meant to mean sockeye pink and chum. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. There's a separate working group for Chinook and coho. So.
And perhaps it's timely that we pick up on that, because I have a question or two about the allocation policy from 1999. And as context for that question, the allocation policy in relation to recreational fishers uses language referring to providing stable and predictable opportunities, priority access for Chinook and coho, with a focus on the opportunity to catch fish and the expectation of catching some fish. Opportunity and expectation are the phrases or words used. And then there's a formula for sockeye pink and chum, which provides for a 95 to 5% split, if you will, between the commercial and recreational fisheries. And there's language about providing predictable and stable fishing opportunities for sockeye pink and chum. Ms. Adams, I'd like to, with that as the premise of the question, and a very much the Coles Notes version of the allocation policy, could you please offer your views on that formulation for recreational fishers? How does the allocation policy, how well does the allocation policy work for the recreational fishery?
The policy went into effect in 1999 after many, many years and different processes to try and come to some resolution on the allocation policy. What the recreational community wanted as paramount to their fishery was some certainty around priority access for Chinook and coho. That's covered in one of the principles. It was also recognized through the allocation policy processes that sockeye, pink, and chum were also important, but not as important as they are to the commercial fishing industry. And so in this policy, there was a method of the 95-5 split, so 5% of the sockeye allocation between commercial and recreational would be allocated to the recreational fishing community, a cap of 5%. And the same is true for chum and also for pink salmon, and that's applicable on a coast-wide basis.
Ms. Nedden, have there been issues with the that 5% cap on sockeye, pink, and chum on each of those species? Have there been issues recently with the recreational sector potentially reaching the 5% mark, or a concern about that?
I would say that there was a meeting we held in January of the Allocation Implementation Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee. There was definitely some concern, not just from the recreational, but from the commercial, about where we were at within that 5% cap, and we wanted to have a review for both sectors of where we were on all species. We looked at the information over a variety of years, and overall we are not over the 5% cap. In 2010, with the abundance of sockeye that was available to fish, or was available for the recreational fishery, particularly in the non-tidal Fraser, there was an opportunity to potentially increase the daily limit and allow the anglers there to harvest more fish. There was a discussion within the sockeye, pink, and chum working group about how that might affect the 5% and whether or not we should go down that road in this year when there's high abundance and get close to that 5%, when in other years when we have lower abundance we might not want to, there was a risk associated with going over. So we had a discussion around it and determined that we wouldn't increase the daily limit in that area. And then in January of this year, when we had our review, we were still under the 5% over all the time series that we looked at.
I take it years of low abundance create more of a risk of hitting the 5% cap, that even if you have hypothetically parallel effort by the recreational sector, or the same number of fish caught, if you will, on a small return, that's going to obviously lead to a higher percentage share.
Yeah, it's not that part is not necessarily driven by Fraser sockeye. It's mostly driven by Barkley Sound sockeye, where the catch can be fairly significant by the recreational sector, but because it's a coast-wide 5% cap. In years of lower abundance for commercial fishing of Fraser, that catch of Barkley Sound sockeye can account for a significant amount of recreational catch.
And some of those, okay, I'll leave that be. Ms. Adams, is it possible, in the Mission to Hope area in particular, is it even possible for the to provide predictable and stable access to sockeye?
In the 10 years that I worked in the Fraser River up until 2005, no, it's not predictable. It's very difficult and it's very dynamic. So we have tried to work with the angling community to not set them up for expectations. Rather, if there is an opportunity, it's a bonus.
I'd just like to add that that's sockeye specific. There are other species that we definitely have provided opportunity, and they know well in advance, like pink salmon and chum salmon for the most part. That is very stable, very predictable opportunities.
Ms. Adams, what sort of management and planning work occurs before the fishing season in a given year?
Generally, we do a post-season meeting with all stakeholders, and particularly with the recreational community. We do meetings at the local level, so with all of our 22 local committees throughout the province, we meet with them and we explain where we ended up at the end of the fishery, and we ask them for feedback on how they felt the fishery went in that year and if there's areas that we can improve in for subsequent years. And that covers everything from fishing opportunities to enforcement concerns to catch monitoring to areas where we could do improvements with education and awareness, to some seasonal differences, like years where we have pink fisheries and years where we don't have pink fisheries, and also comments from the community on the department's salmon enhancement program, where they would like to see the department spending more time and funding on some additional enhancement opportunities and clipping of hatchery fish. So it covers a broad range of issues. So the first meeting of the year, post-season, and then the meetings leading up to our next fishing season, we're developing with them integrated fisheries management plans, and those management plans, which I'm sure you've seen, cover the full gamut of all of the operational details, as well as the conservation objectives, the legal objectives, the department's enforcement objectives, international obligations, catch monitor. I mean, the list goes on, and I'm sure you have seen those.
Yes, and we've had evidence at a general level on the development of the IFMPs. I won't be getting into great detail. What is the SFAB's involvement in that process?
The SFAB, as I mentioned earlier, covers all species in all waters and policy and operational issues. I think if you were to put the commercial crab fishery, commercial prawn fishery, commercial salmon fishery, commercial groundfish fisheries in one room for a weekend, it would be an interesting scenario. But that's like what the SFAB is. We meet for Saturday and Sunday. We talk about all of those different fisheries and all of the issues related to them and the science. And from that process, they then move to an integrated harvest planning committee process with the department, which includes First Nations, environmental organizations, commercial fishers, and I think there are times when the province of BC sits at that table as well, but that's the forum. They also work in a number of different working groups with other stakeholders, like Deb mentioned earlier, the Allocation Implementation Committee. There's local area groups where some of our fishers will be fishing in, say, Johnson Straits, and the local Campbell River fishermen, both commercial and recreational, will discuss some in-season challenges that they may be having in terms of open times and areas and how that may impact one another. So we're trying to work more integrated with all of the different stakeholders in the various areas, and it's a challenge, but I think it's definitely improved and continues to improve. The Integrated Harvest Planning Committee has been around, I think, 5 years now, maybe a little bit longer, but it started out getting going and building relationships. And now I think there's some very important work that they're doing on a number of key areas, and I think it will continue to improve. I think we have to have those discussions together, not separately.
Ms. Sneddon.
And just to add to that, a little bit more detail. So when the draft integrated fisheries management plan comes out, the IFMP. We do take that to the local committees, all 22 committees. We ask for their advice on it. You know, it's generally a 200-plus page document, so we try and condense it to the parts we think they're interested in and can provide us advice that we could use. And we go out and we meet with them on that. And we also allow anyone in the public to comment on it. We do put it on our internet, on the public internet, and anybody who wants to comment on it, whether they're part of a local sport fish advisory committee or not, just a regular recreational angler, they can provide their comments to the department. And we take those comments from those local committees up through that SFAB process, through the regional board and the main board.
Could you describe, Ms. Nedden, the FRIMT, Fraser River Integrated Management Team, and in particular what it's doing for the management of the recreational salmon fishery?
Okay, so the FRIMT, or the Fraser River Integrated Management Team, is a internal departmental group of people. We have representatives. It is a south coast of BC. It's not a north coast process for the most part. We have local managers, area chiefs of resource management, area chiefs of stock assessment, area chiefs of conservation and protection, the salmon team lead generally, and the Canadian chair of the Fraser River panel, which is currently Barry Rosenberger. And we get together at a minimum twice a week, but sometimes 5 times a week, to talk about sockeye and pink ears fisheries management. And we review the information that we get from the Pacific Salmon Commission. Sometimes we get it in advance, sometimes it's just after the meeting. We review the information, we look at our conservation requirements, we look at fisheries planning, we look at how we would plan a fishery to meet all of our policies, allocation policy, the priority for First Nations, FSC, and we make a not always a consensus decision, but we make a collaborative plan in order to manage the fishery according to the department's policies.
With respect to the question of whether to open the recreational fishery for Fraser sockeye, I'd like to learn a little bit about the approach taken, and I'll try and do this by using number 17 on our list of documents, Mr. Lunn. There's an email, Ms. Nedden, that you sent June 22, 2009 to quite a long list of folks within the department, attaching, and you'll see the reference there, attaches a 2006 information note which outlines an approach for managing recreational fisheries for sockeye coastwide. Then skipping one sentence, I have reviewed the document and believe the principles are still valid and the approach is appropriate for 2009, and then it attaches at page 2 the decision guidelines for the recreational Fraser River sockeye fishery from, I think, 2006. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So the guidelines were developed in 2006 by my predecessor, and in conjunction with Devona Adams here. And we really wanted to try and meet that requirement that the recreational fishery sector was looking for around stable and predictable opportunities. So we looked at the recreational sockeye fishery, where it takes place, what are the impacts of that fishery, and are there any decisions we could make, decision guidelines that we could put forward that the community would be aware of on how we would manage this fishery in order to provide that stable and predictable opportunity. So, for example, we looked at the history of the catch of sockeye in the marine waters. So the marine waters where fishing for Fraser River sockeye might take place, it's generally off Victoria, some up in Campbell River, and off the mouth of the Fraser. We looked at the catch from that fishery, and it seemed to range somewhere between 3,000 and 7,000 sockeye a year. So we figured that was a fairly low impact fishery. And
I wonder if I can just interject, because it may be helpful to have on screen one page on Mr. Lunn at the bottom under new decision guidelines. There's reference to South Coast marine waters, which I think is what you're speaking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we looked at that, we thought, well, that's a fairly low impact fishery. What could we do in order to provide stable and predictable opportunities? And we said, well, if we think we're going to meet our First Nations FSC requirements, that they're actually fishing, and that we are pretty sure we're going to have a commercial total allowable catch, we'll open that fishery, low impact. In the other area, the non-tidal waters of the Fraser River, mainly from Mission to Hope, we thought we'd look at the catch. We looked at what the history was there. It was quite a range, but it was between 50, I can't remember now, was it 50 or 20, and 120,000. So it could be a significant fishery. We assessed that as a medium to high impact fishery, and we said, well, what could we do in order to provide stable and predictable opportunities? Well, we knew that first off, we needed to make sure that the First Nation FSC fisheries were open and were having full opportunities. So there's a range of opportunities that we consider full. We wanted to make sure that we had a harvestable surplus, and if those two conditions were met, we would be able to provide opportunities. I just want to back up just a bit and make sure that prior to any of this take place, we want to make sure that we're meeting our conservation requirements. Okay. So these were the two guidelines we came up with. We also put in a little bit of more information about when we would close these fisheries, which you could see in that note.
And we scroll down to see that as the last part of the second page, or the last page there.
Yeah, so closing the in-river recreational fishery if we had any kind of information that said we weren't going to meet the FSC requirements, which is what happened in 2007 and 2009, and if there was a conservation objective that we were not going to meet. So in the Fraser, it would be Cultus sockeye or interior Fraser coho, or the escapement target not being met. So we put this in place in 2006. It was agreed to in 2006, was implemented in 2006, 7, and 8. In 2009, when I did send this forward, we'd had a number of different legal decisions that had come forward in 2008, 2009, and most notably, I think it's Douglas, which changed the way the department looked at the risk around opening these fisheries, and so it really wasn't implemented in 2009.
And I won't ask you to start into a legal discussion, but could you perhaps describe what the different approach, what the result of that was in 2009? What was the approach taken in 2009?
The difference in 2009 was we wanted to make sure that not only was there an anticipation of a commercial total allowable catch, but there actually was one. So we didn't open the marine recreational fishery until we were opening the commercial recreational fishery. We didn't open it in advance at all. In river, it was the same rules. It had to be full First Nations full fisheries and the harvestable surplus.
You marked as exhibit number 526. I noticed that there's 4 different can numbers. Do you want them marked alphabetically in sequence?
I'm open to guidance. That makes some sense to me to mark the attached documents with an A, B, and a C.
Can number ending in 590 will be exhibit 526. 526. Ending in 591 will be 526A. Ending in 592 will be 526B. Ending in 593 will be 526C.
Ms. Sneddon, when, as often occurs, changes need to be made in the middle of the season, the recreational fishing season for sockeye. Could you describe very briefly how those changes are affected?
Yes, so as you're right, changes definitely come into play in Fraser River sockeye fisheries management, and the first step is internally is that we make the decision at the Fraser River Integrated Management Team level what decision we're going to make. From that point, we have to make a regulatory change, and so we do what's called a variation order to vary the regulation. So whether it's to open or close or increase the daily limit or close an area, we would fill out these forms. It's a memo to the Regional Director General asking her to vary either the waters or the open time or the daily limit. At the same time, we do a fishery notice for the public, and we send that up through a series of steps to be reviewed and approved. It goes to the Regional Director General, who signs off on it. When she does, it goes on our fishery notice system out to the public, and we send it out to a wide audience at that point.
Information from creel surveys something that is used in the middle of a fishing season?
It hasn't historically been used, but in the last 4 years, it definitely has come into play. So in 2007 and in 2009, we had a preseason forecast that didn't return. and we had some concerns around that. We also had a recreational fishery open for Chinook, allowing the catch and release of sockeye, and we needed to know what the impact of that catch and release fishery for sockeye was. So we did use the information from the in-season creel program in order to assess the risk of that fishery and make decisions.
I'll ask only one or two questions about a document which probably understates the significance of the document. Number 20 in the list of exhibits is the Vision for Recreational Fisheries in British Columbia 2009 to 2013. It's discussed at some length in the Policy and Practice Report, number 7, and so I won't take you through the governing principles and the vision as they're set out there. Ms. Adams, what I would like to ask you about is, in particular, your involvement in this and what prompted the vision, the process that led up to this document.
I was involved, my role in this was as the Regional Recreational Fisheries Coordinator, one of the people that would lead this, as well as some of the directors in our department. We also had provincial government staff participating at a very high level, and also the recreational community. The genesis of this, where this originated, was a result of the Pierce-McCrae process in 2004, where they delivered a joint task report, I believe it was, and then also First Nations developed a report on our place at the table. And those reports were delivered to government, and recommendations were made in the formation of Pacific Fisheries Reform. The recreational community indicated to the Department of Fisheries that they felt in both of those processes that nowhere in them did they see themselves in that process, that there was not a vision for them in the future of fisheries in British Columbia, and they asked the department to consider that. And the department did, and we agreed that yes, they were more focused on the commercial and First Nations aspects and futures for the fishery, and that we would work with them to develop a vision for their fishery. Many of the principles in the document are similar to the ones that are outlined in the Pacific Fisheries Reform Initiative, so I won't go through those. And just to say that this did start in the fall of 2005. There were consultations. We developed the draft vision for comment and a framework over that time, and then we started consultations with outside the recreational fishing community in 2007, 2008, and 2009, and this document was approved by our fisheries minister in January of 2010.
If this could be marked as an exhibit, please.
527.
Mr. Brock, Mr. Martin, if I could just ask a quick question. I meant to ask this of another panel, but simply forgot. And you may not be the right folks to answer this in any event. In the course of this commission, I have, as you have and my colleagues on the commission have, seen many, many documents. I've seen documents called New Directions. I've seen documents called policies. I've seen documents called vision statements. I've seen documents called reform. And in some cases, they're actually acted upon, my words, not yours. It's like a vision statement a policy in the guise of something called a vision statement, where it's actually acted upon. Others seem to be just for discussion purposes, purely still called a policy. It's unclear to me, and you may not be the right people to answer this, how on earth you sort this all out. What does it all mean? What's a policy? What's a vision? What's a new direction? What's a reform package? Do they all have the same weight? Do they all mean that? I mean, I understand the content is different for them, but in terms of your responsibilities, taking them forward, consulting with user groups, talking to the public about them, posting them on websites, how do I weight them in terms of, within DFO, their implications and their sense of weight and responsibility?
You're correct. I'm probably not the person to answer all of that. But I would say that staff and stakeholders share the concerns or the confusion or whatever, fitting it all together and what takes priority or not. I can speak to the vision document. The vision for the recreational fisheries is based on a national operational policy for recreational fisheries in Canada This is a Made in BC piece of that. So we have a higher overarching national policy for recreational fisheries in Canada, and this is the vision underneath that for British Columbia with more specifics to it.
Ms. Adams, is there work being done to follow up on Vision, the document?
Yes, we're currently working with the recreational community and with some province of BC staff, although they've been going through several reorganizations, as you're probably well aware. But what we did from the vision was we worked with the community to identify, you know, there's a lot of issues going on in all of these fisheries. We don't have the resources to tackle 100 issues at one time. We need help from you to identify with us and the province of BC the most important issues that we can start tackling together, recognizing that there's going to be trade-offs and give and take on all fronts. We're not always, all of us, going to get everything we want. And so we went about doing workshops in an action planning process, because part of our vision, the second page of it, says the vision is only as good as the actions we take. And we really believe in that, because we've all seen way too many vision documents sitting on shelves somewhere that are never acted on. So we developed an action group. I met with them. We had facilitated discussions. And I said to the recreational community, can you please give us your Reader's Digest of the highest priorities? And they gave us 60 some odd. And I said, folks, that's still too much. We need you to narrow it down. And I think we got down to 22, and we now have 12. So they've given us their 12 priorities, and we've been trying to action them. And communication, education, awareness is up there in the top 3. Access and allocation is also up there. And the third one, I would just speak to the top 3. I don't want to bore you with the details on 12 of them. But the third one is improvement of information and catch accounting, so that we can make the best decisions possible for the resource and also for the fisheries as a whole.
Ms. Sneddon, I will really only ask 1 or 2 questions on an area of some controversy or interest, and I'm sure you spend a lot of your time addressing these sorts of questions. This has to do with the bottom bouncing method in particular is used in the river. There's been some controversy over that, and and this is discussed in the PPR, but there are different views as to whether that's considered an unethical way of fishing, whether it's considered a perfectly ethical way of fishing. That's a slippery process, deciding what ethics should govern. So I'd like you to very briefly comment on the controversy, but perhaps more importantly, does the department get involved in that ethical controversy or debate? Does it have a position or view?
Maybe just a bit of background. The bottom bouncing is a legitimate fishing method. It's been around forever. It's used worldwide for all sorts of species. It's used in deep water in Australia on reefs. It's used for walleye in Ontario. It's used for steelhead on the Thompson River. It's a very effective method for targeting fish, and very selective in clear water conditions. And generally you're bouncing some type of a lure on the ground, the bottom of the river, that the fish sees and actively strikes. What's occurred in the Fraser River is somebody's decided that they would try that in the Fraser River, but the Fraser River is, well, generally not more than 6 to 8 inches of visibility. So you're bouncing along a weight with a hook and a line, generally not a spoon, just a line with some wool on it. And you're bouncing it along the bottom of the river, and fish is swimming upstream, and he's got his mouth open as he's going upstream, and the hook hits the outside of his mouth if the river's bank is here, and you feel something, and you pull on the line, and you've hooked a fish. It does hook generally in the mouth, but it has not bit the lure. But it is hooked in the mouth, which is by regulation a legal fishing method. So there are some proponents in the recreational fishing community who view this as not true sport fishing. It's not, in the Fraser, not the majority of anglers, as you can see by the number of people that go out fishing for sockeye. The department does not get involved in that ethical debate. If it's a legal fishing method, we just, it's open or it's closed. We don't regulate bottom bouncing. We don't have the authority to do that, and we don't get into a debate about ethics. It's a legal fishing method when they hook it in the mouth. There was something else I was going to say on that.
Let me.
Right, okay,
Go
so
ahead,
yeah,
yes.
there's debates in all sectors around whether their fishery is ethical or not. There's groundfish trawl fisheries, there's seine fisheries, there's even trolling. There's impacts to other fish and the environment that are ethical concerns for people. So it's not a thing just for the recreational community. So.
And if I might turn to PPR number 7, page, on my printed version, page 35, paragraph 86. And Ms. Sneddon, this is a question about something that's referred to in the PPR, a 2007 draft paper by the Chilliwack River Watershed Strategy, and it sets out some issues that have arisen there. I take it you have some comments on those issues and whether they apply to Fraser sockeye?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a document, the Chilliwack River Watershed Strategy. They are a group of people in the Chilliwack area that were concerned around fishing and fishing behavior on the Chilliwack River. They got together, they wrote a paper. It was provided to the department, and in that paper they talked about fishing behavior on the Chilliwack. The Chilliwack's a fairly small system with a lot of anglers in a small area that gets, at certain times of the year, a huge abundance of fish. And when you have a huge abundance of fish in a small area with a lot of people, you tend to see some behaviors that may not be very acceptable. This is not specific to sockeye because we do not have a sockeye fishery in the Chilliwack River, but some of these problems have definitely gone into the Fraser, although at what levels would be hard to determine. Yeah, I would say that there's definitely just that it's some of those behaviors have come into the Fraser River.
Thank you. Ask you about selective fishing and the relevance and applicability of selective fishing to recreational salmon fishing.
Just with regards to recreational salmon fishing, in order to improve selectivity, we use different, very limited options in the fisheries regulations, which we can vary the method of gear that folks are using, the bait that they're using, and a few other types of gear and bait and method related regulations, but there are probably less than 12 of them in the regulations. So we don't have what the fishermen we don't have a lot of tools in our toolbox for gear and method and bait regulations. So the main restrictions that we have for the recreational fishing community with regards to gear would be barbed or not, and then looking at hook shank between the hook and the stalk of the hook, and then other things like bait restrictions. So it's very limited in terms of what we can do with gear, bait, and method regulations.
Do you think the department needs more tools at its disposal? A greater power to use regulations? This
Chilliwack River group recommended a number of things. We've also looked at fisheries in Lake Washington for sockeye, and we look at fisheries obviously in other jurisdictions to see how they're dealing with challenges. And I guess the short answer is yes. I think we could add some additional tools in our toolbox, our regulatory toolbox. The recreational community has historically held very dear and near and dear to their hearts that the department not start mucking around in what they call their tackle box. We don't want you regulating ethics. We want you managing fish and fisheries, and you need to leave the ethical things to us. And sometimes we've taken that advice, and other times we haven't. We've put in regulations that we believe are needed and necessary. But certainly I think we could add some additional tools in our toolbox. We talked earlier about circle hook. That could be one, but it's not certainly the exhaustive list of options.
With respect to, I'm going to turn to some final questions before we break at 12:30. If this may run us to the break. with respect to the sockeye catch and release mortality study that was conducted, and Ms. Sneddon, I expect to direct these questions to you. The policy and practice report is on screen, which is helpful. Paragraph 82 on page 34 refers to this at the top of the page as being a 3-year release mortality study. In fact, it's continuing this year. It's a 4-year release mortality study.
Yes, that is correct.
And before I get into the specifics of the report, at a general level, could you help us understand what is the importance of having catch and release mortality information? Well, I'll leave it at that. What is the importance of that information?
Well, this study came about for a number of reasons, but the first and main reason it came about was in the Fraser and the Chilliwack area, there was some conflict between First Nations and the recreational community. There was a view that the recreational catch and release fishery of sockeye had a significant impact on sockeye that were being released, and it was causing some conflict between the user groups. The Fraser Salmon and Watersheds program assisted the department with some funding to come and initiate a study. We developed a study design jointly with them, with biologists from the department, and we came up with a study design that would look at 4 years of information so that we could capture all the run timing groups if possible, a wide variety of water conditions, both temperature and flow, and also the abundance, whether the abundance affects whether or not mortality rates are higher or lower. So we got some money together and we started this study. The intention, one, was to try and dispel some myths if we could. It was also part of the allocation policy. It does say that in the future, recreational catch and release mortalities would have to be accounted for. Although the policy doesn't say when it's going to be accounted for, it is something that we needed to look at. This is catch and release mortalities are not required only for recreational fisheries. We need to have them in all fisheries. That is something that is ongoing, and that's noted in one of the reports we were looking at in the IFMP. And it's something that a group called NSERC, National Sciences and Engineering Research Council, have a funding grant, and they're looking at catch and release mortalities in all sectors. They're looking in seine fisheries, troll fisheries, and gill nets. And when we have that information, we're going to know the true mortality, and that will help us to better manage salmon fisheries. And so this study, again, it was a 3-year or 4-year study. We've conducted 3 years, and in the past, what we've done is we didn't have any information about release mortalities in freshwater, and we had been applying a 10% mortality to any fish caught and released based on a study done with using troll gear in the marine waters. So if you're fishing in the marine waters with troll gear, it's clear water, you're using a hook, a lure or something, the fish actually bites it. The hook's inside the mouth. The chances of it hitting a vein and bleeding out and dying we've estimated through studies 10%. But when you're fishing in the Fraser River and you're bottom bouncing, you're bouncing this hook along and it hooks you in the outside of the mouth, in what's called the maxillary, it generally does not hit a vein. Very, very few fish are were thought to die as a result of this fishing activity. So we wanted to prove that. So we put this study in place, and after 3 years, we're in the 1 to 3% range rather than 10%, which in some years, when you're releasing a lot of sockeye, could be a fairly significant number. So in 2010, in the Salmon IFMP, we adopted a 3% mortality rate to use against fish caught and released rather than a 10%. And that 3% is higher than the 3 years of the study so far, but those numbers that are reported in paragraph 82 there, those are the hard number. That's not the variance, so there is a variance around those, and so we went with 3% for that buffer.
And that's a very concise way of giving us an understanding of the study, which is referred to here, conducted by J.O. Thomas and Associates in the Fraser River. And if I just want to confirm that I have it right, as a result of the numbers that were developed from that study, from the department's point of view, for planning and management purposes, rather than applying a 10% mortality rate to fish that are caught and released, that's changed to a 3% rate?
Yes, that is correct.
I have a correction to the PPR which I'd like to ask you about. In paragraph 81 of our report makes reference incorrectly to third sentence down. This number was based on information from a commercial troll fishery. In fact, it's a marine but a recreational troll fishery that generated the 10% figure.
Yes, that is correct. So that was the two changes I wanted to mention. That one and the 3 to 4 year in paragraph 82.
Thank you. Let's move to, I think this is more by way of completing the documentary record. Number 22 on the list of exhibit.
Actually, Brock, before we move on, could I talk a little bit more about that mortality?
Yes?
Okay, so the study is a short-term mortality study. We're only looking at mortality over 24-hour mortality. We're not looking long-term. And that is what's been consistently used in the marine water fisheries as well. We're applying a short-term mortality. The NSERC program that is currently underway, the 5-year one, they're looking at longer term. They're looking at, did the fish make it to the spawning ground? So for management purposes, this study was looking at 24 hours, and that's what we're going to use until we have more information, which we need from all fisheries, not just recreational.
Identified that you, in fact, in August of last year, with Ms. Grant, myself, and Mitch Taylor from the Department of Justice, took us to the Fraser River and showed us, Mr. Thomas, the study that he was conducting and that work that's described in these reports.
Yes, that is correct.
I'm not sure how Mr. Taylor manages to go fishing and not come here for the hearing today, but I'll leave that to Mr. Timberg. With respect to the first document there, number 22, that is the study with the date of February 2009. The preliminary investigations is what it's entitled.
Yes, that's the results from the 2008 year, the final report.
I'd ask this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
528.
Mr. Registrar, please let me know if I do this too quickly with respect to entering these exhibits. There's 3 others. They go in sequentially by year. Number 23 on the list of documents is the 2008 preliminary summary. Is that correct, Ms. Sneddon?
Sorry, yes it is.
I'd ask that be marked as an exhibit, please.
529.
Number 24 should be the 2009 summary of findings. Is that correct, Ms. Sneddon?
Yes, that is correct.
530.
Finally, number 25 on the list, the 2010 summary of findings. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
531.
Before I move into some questions on creel surveys, I have sort of a question that doesn't fit neatly anywhere, but it's this. Ms. Adams, I'll start with you. Could you comment on the relative importance of the recreational fishery within the Department of Fisheries and Oceans? Is recreational fishery a forgotten younger sibling within the department?
I would say if we looked nationally, yes, because most of our fisheries in Canada are commercial that the Department of Fisheries is involved in. In the Pacific area, Pacific region, I would say that it still is low in profile within the Pacific, but I think it has the opportunity and has had the opportunity to climb in the last 10, 20 years. After the Pierce Commission in '82, it was identified that there were very few resources dedicated to the recreational fishery, and the department increased resources. And currently, there are very few fisheries management resources directly working on recreational fisheries in this province.
Mr. Tatey or Ms. Sneddon, anything to add on that question?
I guess, Devona pointed out that the Pierce report recommended an increase, and that did happen, and we did have a division called the Recreational Fisheries Division, worked out of our regional headquarters, and had, I think there were 12 people working in recreational fisheries management full-time. Currently, we have Devona as the regional recreational coordinator, and then 3 area staff who work full-time on recreational fisheries. And then we have other managers that do some part-time stuff. So I'm not sure we're at where we were in the mid-90s anymore.
Mr. Commissioner, it's,
I wanted to ask this panel, again, you may not be the right people to answer, and so I apologize. One of you, and I can't recall which one, I think it might have been you, Ms. Adams, used the word that conservation trumps everything else. Not exactly your exact words, but I think that was the spirit of what you had to say. Are the folks within the recreational fishery in DFO who are managing the recreational fishery, do they wear the same hat with respect to conservation, First Nations, and then the recreational fishery? In other words, are there different people doing these different tasks in terms of the decision-making side of it, or is it a person taking off one hat today and putting on another hat and saying, well, I've dealt with the conservation issues, now I've got to deal with the FSC, and tomorrow I'll deal with the recreational fishery?
My experience is it's been a bit of both. When I worked in the Fraser River, I felt like Sybil. Half the time I was a commercial fishery manager, and the other half I was a recreational fishery manager. But there are common principles, and certainly conservation. I think most staff at any level, whether it's fisheries management or stock assessment or enforcement, we're very cognizant. And I think most of us have got involved in resource management because we care about the resource, and so we want to make sure the resource is protected. So I would say that message gets out. It gets a bit tricky in how to implement some of the policies and some of the case law and court decisions, and we're still finding our way on that. But I think there are certainly crossovers in all of our jobs between the different fisheries, but in this region we only have 4 dedicated fishery managers working on recreational fisheries. Maybe you might want to add.
I just wanted to, in the Lower Fraser area and in sockeye management in particular, it is a team, the Fraser River Integrated Management Team, that's looking at sockeye management, and we are 100% looking at conservation first, then our obligations under First Nations to either FSC or treaty obligations, and then we're looking at the allocation policy and where we fit commercial and recreational in there. So as that team, we're working together to meet all of those guidelines.
The questions that I have remaining focus on Creel surveys. Mr. Tady, I expect most of these will be directed your way. If I might start, Mr. Tady, and please assume the question is directed to you unless I say otherwise. If I might start by confirming the staffing with respect to the recreational Creel survey in the Lower Fraser. I take it that includes 1 biologist, 1 technical person, 1 data entry clerk, and in addition to that, a number of term or seasonal employees who are involved?
I'm the program head for a program that has the title of Chum, Pink, and Recreational Fisheries. So I do chum assessments, pink assessments, some escapement work, juvenile work, and then a portion of the program I'm involved in also does recreational fisheries assessments. So yes, there's myself, there's another biologist in our group, there's a full-time technician in our group, and then through the course of the season we have operational and salary dollars that we use to hire staff to conduct our recreational surveys. In the past, the recreational survey has gone in the Fraser main stem has gone from May to, even through to December. Early in the years, I think some of the earlier studies went from March until December. The time period varies sometimes depending on the funding, but recently it's been a May to mid-October sort of period. So, that's a large part of the year where we have staff that, yes, they're doing other things, but a large part of the time is dedicated towards assessing the recreational fishery. And seasonally we will hire, it can be anywhere from 8 to 12 seasonal staff to conduct the assessment projects.
Should ask the most obvious question. What is a Creel survey?
Creel survey is it's a systematic, planned, structured method for assessing recreational effort and catch. That's my interpretation of it. and that's what we use for the Fraser. That's what our goal is for the Fraser. So that's what a creel survey is.
In the case of the creel as used for fish in the Fraser River and the recreational fishery in the Fraser River, could you give us an understanding of, at a general or overview level, of how that survey is used, what the components are of the survey? How it's conducted, I'm sorry.
The creel survey we use in the Fraser main stem is it's actually a complemented survey. It uses two independent surveys. One is an access point survey where we will visit various locations on the Fraser River and interview anglers as they're leaving the fishing for the day. Access points are usually places where there's a little bit of a bottleneck that might be for anglers. It could be a boat ramp, it could be a trail. So what we get from that, one of the components that we get from that is when we interview the anglers, that's where we conduct an interview of the angler. And from those interviews, we will ask questions like, how long have you been fishing? What is your target species that you were trying to catch? What did you catch? Of what you caught, what did you harvest and keep? Or what did you release? We'll get information like that from the anglers. We can also inspect the catch. We can ask if we can inspect the catch as well for verification of what they have told us, species identification, collection of biological information. The second part, that gets us, what we can get from that information is a rate of what the angler has caught by species, and we pair that up with another survey of the entire study area. You know, I'm wondering now if this might be a good time to. I did have through the presentation.
I thought you were going to say have lunch.
To have lunch.
I was just going to suggest lunch. I wonder if I might suggest that we break until 2 o'clock, Mr. Commissioner, and convene at that point. And
Okay.
I'll be asking more questions.
We will now adjourn until 2 p.m.